So, hello everyone. I am Stephanie Staal, and for part of our Wolfer author series, we're very excited to have Susan McPherson here today. She's speaking about her book, The Lost Art of Connecting. And and there it is. And the subtitle is The Gather, Ask, Do Method for Building Meaningful Business Relationships. So we'll be getting into that later in this session. So I'm going to give a brief bio of Susan. Susan is the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. It's a communications consultancy. She has more than 25 years of experience in marketing, public relations, and corporate responsibility. Had big clients like Dell Technologies and Tiffany's. She's also an angel investor and a super connector. And I can personally attest to the latter because Susan is my neighbor and I've been to some of her fabulous get-togethers and they've been really wonderful. So welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for being here.
Stephanie, it's such a joy to see you. And I am so looking forward to the day where those gatherings will happen again and you're right over on my roof deck.
I know, I can't wait. I can't wait. And as we were saying before we went live, it seems like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully soon. So I wanted to say congratulations on the book. We were talking a little bit about it. It's really a fantastic book. So many tips. And I think I had said to you, I was underlining and writing notes and putting Post-its in and doing everything. And you wrote this during the pandemic, which is incredible. And it really seems like the perfect book at the perfect time. And, you know, we're just coming off a year of really feeling disconnected from people. So what I wanted to start off with is you, in the beginning of the book, you cite a pretty shocking statistic where you say between the years 1985 and 2009, the average American social network shrank, meaning their number of close confidants declined by up to 1/3. And you called it a loneliness epidemic. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and how we got here.
Sure. Well, I think it's important for everyone to know. And before I even say that, thank you for inviting me and thank you to
Thank you for coming.
And the content you all put out to the world is remarkable and needed. The book's original premise was put forward 4 or 5 years ago, long before we had this idea or even knew what was coming. And the original thesis was all about the fact that we had become slaves to our technology. We had almost gotten to the point where we measured our connectability by the likes and followers and number of clicks on articles, as opposed to the meaningful connections where we actually support one another. And a friend of mine told me that when she would drop her 10-year-old and 12-year-old off at the bus stop, she would hug them goodbye, send them up on the bus. And as soon as they got in their respective seats, she would watch as their head dropped down as they were looking at their respective mobile devices. And then she looked at all the other kids and guess what? They were all doing the same. And I don't know about you, Stephanie. I remember my bus experiences. They were quite like that. They weren't amazing.
Yeah.
But I did communicate with my fellow students. So both of those kind of gave me the impetus. And I basically put forth a book deal or a book proposal on the premise that we needed to get back to this meaningful connection. And obviously in doing that, I learned a lot about this loneliness epidemic that seemed so odd, given that we had all these means to connect. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just the elderly. I mean, it was Gen Z, millennials, you name it. And obviously this past year has made that even more challenging. So, but I think it's important to note the book wasn't originally about connect during a pandemic.
No, exactly.
Pandemic.
No, so true. No, that's why when I looked at that statistic, I was like, you know, between 1985 and 2009, that's long before the pandemic. So this is something that's really been evolving for a while. And then, then all of a sudden, you know, everything's sort of blown sideways by this pandemic. So why don't we step back for a second? Let's go to the gather, ask, do method that you talk about in the book. And I want to say what really struck me when I first started reading is, you know, you think my first thought was, oh, it's a book about networking. And I know exactly. So I start reading it and I think, well, no, this is actually the opposite of networking, because networking is all about what can you do for me? And you say very, you know, upfront, this is a completely different approach. And it's what you start out with, what can I do for you? Which is kind of a revolutionary idea when you think about it, when it's talking about connections. So let's start with the gather part of Gather Asked You. You could talk about that.
And thank you for noticing, because I am not anti-networking by any stretch of the imagination. And we all at times in our lives need to network, and we will again. But networking is a very transactional, a very linear approach, very kind of numbers approach. This is deep. This is one-to-one, human to human, and much more palatable for people who may be introverts or maybe shy. So, and yes, one thread through the entire book is discarding what can I get? What can you do for me? And more, how can I be helpful? How can I support you? And by doing that, you are helping yourself. Right. So the book is divided into 3 phases. Gather, Ask, Do, which is essentially the methodology that I had been using for years. I had just never named it. And I understand when you write a business book, you have to have a methodology or you don't get a book deal. But when, you know, the pencil came to the metal, or whatever the foolish statement is, I realized I had been doing this. And Gather is essentially the process, first of all, where you ask yourself the important question: what is a meaningful connection? Because Stephanie, for you, it may be a very different answer than it may be for me, than it may be for Nina, than it may be for all the other wolfers out there. The next component is think deeply about what is the community you want to build around you in the next 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks, and how are you going to ensure that community doesn't look like you, isn't the same age as you, is the same color as you. So how are you going to ensure that you can build some variety and inclusiveness in that community? And lastly, what is your chief differentiating factor? What is your secret sauce that you can offer up to the community? Okay, so that's the gather phase. Do you want me to go on to the next?
Yes. Well, I just want to pause there for a second and say, I do like the intentionality of it, where you're really saying, okay, I'm thinking about what can I give? What do I want my community to look like? And the diversity piece is really important, that people don't really talk about as much, I think, in a book about meaningful relationships, but actually searching out people who are different from you and learning from their different experiences. And I think that provides so much opportunity for growth when you do that. If you're just people who think like you, look like you, have the same experience as you, don't ever really grow.
You're in place, right?
Right.
You're not learning new. You're not expanding you.
Yeah, exactly.
And
you have that great. Oh.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you have that great metaphor of the constellation.
Yeah.
When you're talking about gathering, which, if you want to expound on that.
Of course. Well, if we think back to antiquity, when the folks that looked up in the sky and tried to make sense out of the universe actually created stories by looking at how the stars interconnected with one another. And as we think about the stars in the sky, they're constantly moving, right? I mean, and the earth is moving, everything's moving. It is not linear, it is not static. And the way I think of connecting people is you're actually creating tapestries of stories. When you introduce 2 people or you connect 3 people, much magic can happen. I mean, not all the time, of course, but it is this notion of it's always going to be evolving and changing. And to me, that is the uniqueness and wonderful ability of, or the wonderful activity that happens when you introduce people. So if the connection to this constellation is the magic that we can create when we bring folks together in a meaningful way.
Right.
It's a little,
I love that,
but it makes sense, right?
It does. I love that image of the tapestries of stories. I think that's really beautiful. So what would you say to somebody who, and a lot of people have this thought, I think, when they're looking to build relationships, what do I, they first of all say, well, what do I really have to offer? I think that can be there's a lot of undermining that goes on, especially with women. I think that can be very tough. And if you're not an extrovert, how do you how do you put yourself out there and start to build these constellations?
Well, first of all, every single person has something to offer. The challenge is how are you going about thinking about it? And I know kids just coming out, young adults graduating college right now think, I'm 22. What do I have to offer? I don't have a community. First of all, I often say to a 22-year-old, if they say they don't know what to offer a 56-year-old, I'm 56. 2 words, TikTok.
Yes. I just learned about TikTok. Yes.
Exactly. I think this isn't just about a skill you've learned professionally or a course you've taken in college. These are life's experiences that give us agency, that give us experiences that then we can share with others.
Right.
And I will, excuse me, in terms of being, not being an extrovert and how you start this process. Well, when we get to ask, you will see this isn't about being the talker in the room. This is about learning to ask the meaningful questions and then stopping and using our 2 ears and our 1 mouth to listen 50% more than we speak, so that we can find out what is important to others. Then that we can go and do the do, and that is the introducing to others, the connecting with others, the follow through, which makes you reliable, helpful, and the all important trustworthy. So that's essentially the flow of the gather, ask, do. But my comment about someone who may not be extroverted, or maybe let's go so far as say painfully shy, the good news is if you can come up with a few deep, meaningful questions, and you find maybe 3 people during the course of an evening or the course of a Zoom a virtual session, as opposed to 20, that becomes palatable. And having those questions in your back pocket that are things very different than what's the weather in Cleveland or what did you have for lunch today, but instead maybe this year's been hard. How are you doing? Is there any help I can be providing given this horrific global pandemic? Or if you could pick anywhere in the world that you could go when the doors are open, where would you go? Or if you could solve one problem in the next month and had the resources to do it, what would be that problem? Right. Those types of questions, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, combination of the two, can be asked. And then the good thing is then you can stop and listen and go so far as maybe take notes and then follow. Right.
No, and it goes back to the connection part of it, because that is how you connect with people, as you get underneath the surface of things. So where would you go if you could go anywhere right now?
Me?
Yes. I've been thinking about this a lot. So
first of all, I would go around the corner and give you a hug. Honestly, this is kind of a funny side story. Last January 2020, I went to Antarctica. Crazy.
I think I saw on your social media, actually, beautiful photos.
You feel like you're on another planet.
Other world.
But somebody said to me before I went, Susan, is this your first trip to Antarctica? And I remember thinking, you don't really go twice. It's not like Rehoboth Beach or Cape Cod, And I just remember thinking to myself, wow. But the day I got home, honestly, I love hearing your dog.
I'm sorry, I know. Here we go.
So pandemic.
The pandemic. Here we are. The Zoom interview.
I was to get back. Can't wait to get back.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh dear. I know you have a beautiful pup at home too.
I do. Unfortunately, I have 2 herniated discs in my back.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I like hearing your dog.
Oh, good. I hope the audience doesn't mind so much. One's a beagle, part beagle, so she's very, very vocal. No, Bingo, settle down. But yes, okay. It makes it hard to concentrate.
You want to take a pause? Do you want?
No, No, that's okay. I'll try to work through it. So, okay. So going back, I think one of the tips that you had given in your book is to invite people over,
Yeah.
that you could sort of create the opportunity, which and take agency in that way. And even if you were feeling shy or you were feeling like you didn't have much to offer, just start with, let's have a gathering and let's meet each other, which I thought was a great a great tip.
Well, it's my way of turning FOMO on its head to JOMO, which it's not the joy of missing out, which you
Right.
immediately think of. It's the joy of meeting others. And again, as a hat tip to those who are more introverted than I am, you don't have to have 50 people, and you don't have to have 20 people. You can have 3 people and ask each person to bring one other person with them. And then voila, you have a gathering. And then you don't have to worry about not being included. And you then are actually becoming a connector and build relationships. And mind you, this can also be done online. This does not, and I've been doing them all year, mainly for my own sanity, but also because I can help myself continuing to introduce people and connect people, even during these very challenging times.
Right, exactly. Which actually brings me to my next question to make it very topical. What are some suggestions you have for people who are feeling very isolated, feeling very disconnected during the pandemic? Maybe they're alone, they don't have family living with them that they can see every day, feeling separated from their friends, but also feeling a little burned out on the Zoom calls and all of that.
Well,
what would you recommend?
I can share what I have been doing, because I think, as I mentioned to you before we were live, Stephanie, I've been alone for 12 months. No kids, no parents, no partner, no significant other. And it's been really, really hard. Now, I never go so far as to say I had it as challenging as people who lost loved ones, lost livelihoods, who were victims of racial strife and all the horrors that we've witnessed throughout this past year. But I will say it's been a slog. And I found that, number one, showing up as I was, in other words, not trying to be superwoman every day at the company with my employees, which was a little scary. When you run a company, you don't really want to show up with tears in your eyes. Yeah. But I felt that it was the only way I could be. And of all times in our lives, this is when we don't have to be superwomen.
Right.
Secondly, every day I would reach out to 3 to 5 people. And I realize that may sound like a big lift, but sometimes it was just a text or a WhatsApp. But with two goals. One, just to share a little joy when I felt joyful, because I knew at least the person on the receiving end, for the most part, was going to feel some love. Yeah. And 2, it was my way of saying, hey, I'm here, don't forget me.
Yeah.
Okay? And just by doing that, the dopamine that I got gave me a little oomph, okay, to maybe get me through the next few hours.
Right.
So I think to be very mindful and intentional. And I know we're starting to, I almost term this time we're in is almost kind of like a purgatory, right? Like, we have like a toe out the door, and we can feel it. We know it's coming, but it's still not safe. I was joking with somebody the other day, for those of us who live in cities and in apartment buildings, it's kind of like when your neighbor orders in food and it smells so good, but you don't get any. That's what it feels like. So the thing is this is the time to be intentional. This is the time to start thinking about that gather phase, but also, reach out to people that you haven't reached out to in a year, and 2 years, and 10 years. It's okay. And it's okay to be very upfront and say, I know we haven't been in touch. That's okay. Address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I have to say that really did get me through the beginning of the pandemic, when everything was feeling so topsy-turvy. And I heard from a lot of people I hadn't heard from in a while. And it was so, gave me so much sustenance to kind of get through. And it really does make a huge difference to do that, to reach out to people, just check in, say hello.
Think of the difference you're making in people's lives.
Right, exactly.
And it's such a minute little micro action that you can do regularly. I mean, we don't forget to brush our teeth, So I
That's
say
fair.
if you could establish this as like a baseline habit to have, it's a great, even when we're back in quote unquote, whatever normalcy we are.
Normal times, right? Exactly. You wrote something very interesting in the book that resonated with me because I've been at home with a 5-year-old doing, sort of a hybrid of remote learning in person. It was all remote last spring. That's been challenging. I feel like I was almost to the other end of the spectrum where I had no me time. I couldn't think. I couldn't, I was trying to work, trying to parent, homeschooling, dogs, the whole package. And sadly my mother passed away this summer unexpectedly. And so that was a whole other dimension of, loss. And so you wrote here that women need 2 networks. And that really resonated with me. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit about that. Why and what does it
I think
do?
what you just shared is why.
Yeah.
We have the weight of the world on us, and this past year with the She Session has put so much stress on women's shoulders. So I think and I don't want to scare people that, oh my God, I've got to like invest in both. It's not a matter of investing in both, but it's just being conscious about you do need to have kind of those like professional male, driven, and then also those people that you can actually like rely upon when I'm just going to say when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I'm also a big believer in that, we don't have like work Susan and home Susan. I decided years ago it was tiring being 2 people.
Yeah.
And it would just be easier to be Susan.
Right.
And I mean, obviously not, taking all my dirty laundry to the professional setting, but carrying that same impact focus, that bringing people together focused also worked in the workplace.
Right.
And so it just became much, much more seamless to just be one person.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. It can be very hard if you're doing, playing these 2 roles, you keep them so separate. So it's exhausting. Life is exhausting enough. So,
Exactly.
not having to worry about. And I wonder if that is a bright side to having this work home separation blurred in the past year. I mean, there really is very little separation these days.
I mean, we are all in our home. I mean, not all.
Right.
People obviously don't have the privilege to be able to work in their living rooms, but you're seeing everyone's dirty laundry basically.
Right. Exactly. It'll be. Do you have any predictions for how things will change going forward in terms of relationships? And
I don't know about I do think, and this may be the eternal optimist in me, I do think we're never going to take relationships for granted anymore.
yeah.
And I do think yes, of course, we're still, if not more, reliant on our technology to connect. But I do think we are going to be much more intentional about how we use our technology. And whether I do believe the workplace will be some sort of hybrid. Yes, of course, there are going to be companies that absolutely require people to come back. But from everything I'm reading and hearing is it's going to be, workplace for innovation and celebrations and gatherings to work on projects, but not every day, all day.
Right.
So that means I do believe we're still going to be having these virtual, sessions, gatherings, meetings, which also helps, keep our carbon footprint down a little bit, which I think is somewhat of a positive. It also enables us to, cross borders in ways that we've never been able to. And I liken, I like to showcase the fact that the Zoom chat or the Microsoft Teams chat or whatever platform you're using has become a very effective way to connect with colleagues. When we used to be in meeting after meeting after meeting in physical offices, you couldn't have side chats with people. You'd get in trouble if in the middle of a meeting you were like, hey, how are you?
Right.
But now you have the opportunity to do that. And actually, check in with people or introduce yourselves to new colleagues that perhaps you haven't met and offer up perhaps, hey, Chris, we've never met. I'm new to the company. I'd love to learn more about your role so that I can be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Brings it back full circle too, to getting to know people. So I was wondering if you have anything to, and we've touched on some of this already, but pointing to our demographic, it's women over 40. And a lot of, we see in the community, a lot of women are going through big shifts in life. I mean, they're obviously the physical changes, but there are a lot of women who are either downsized from their careers, or the children are becoming more independent or leaving home, and so maybe they want to make a switch or want to do something different. They've had 20, 25 years in one career. Maybe they want to do something that they've always wanted to do. That's different. Getting divorced, getting remarried. There are just a host of things that do seem to pile up. I mean, they happen throughout life, but they do seem to pile up sometimes. 40 plus. So I was wondering if you have any advice for women who are in that stage of transition, of pivoting, who are feeling maybe a little overwhelmed about where to start. How do I make these changes?
I founded my company at 48. Okay, I'm 56 now, and it's still going strong. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, part of the impetus also with what I shared earlier, but for the book, was the fact that about 95% of the business over the last 8 years has been inbound. And I credit that with the connections and connecting that I did in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I think when we think about investing our time in building our communities and building our connections, it is not a waste of time. And it can be helpful, whatever path you decide to take. Because if you have a meaningful community surrounding you, there's nothing you can't do, because you have people from which to ask for help, to reach out for introductions, to reach out for knowledge sharing. And there is no way I ever would have been able to build a company if I hadn't done what I did. Here's the kicker though. I had no long-term intention of being an entrepreneur. There was not even a little fleeting vision in my eye in my 20s and 30s that this was going to be in my destiny. So I think the other kind of words of advice I would offer is, even though you feel like you're formed, let's say.
Never formed.
Never. And it's always, at least for me, it's always been the detours, not the destination. Okay? Yeah. And just lead with curiosity. That you will never go wrong by being curious about everything and anything, and curious about others. And lastly, and I think this is really important, and that is, never question the value of people. Meaning, oh, that person can't really do anything to help me because he or she or they are not in my space. Or, they may not have the same education or something, because everything we don't know, and it's something to learn.
Very true. So wait, you made me very interested. How did you decide to start your own company?
Oh, it was a joke. I was at another consulting firm, and there was an exodus of talent. Okay. And for anyone who's watching, who ever worked in consulting, when people leave, the writing's on the wall. And I knew that I had to find a job. And I was terrified to leave without an income. And two organizations, Global Citizen Year and Girl Rising, said, if you leave, we will go ahead and bring you on as a consultant for 3 or 4 months. So, Stephanie, I was so sure that they were going to change their mind that I left the company on a Friday and I started on a Monday. Wow. I had not gone without a paycheck since I was 15. I mean, even through college, I waitressed the entire time. So I, had these images of bag lady. So I was terrified. And, lo and behold, now I look back, I'm like, why didn't I take a vacation? I'll even go one step further. My ex-husband's name is McPherson. Okay. I never would have named it McPherson Strategies if I thought it was going to be something. I mean, bless his heart, he's a good guy, and I would never take anything away from him. But I wouldn't have named my company after.
So were you just working out of your apartment? It was Monday.
Yeah, well, and I will tell you, and maybe this was one good thing that leading into the pandemic, we have been virtual. We are about to hire our 13th employee, and we are everywhere. I mean, not everywhere, but Chicago, Atlanta, Syracuse. And the good news is when everything kind of came closing or crashing down in March, we were all prepared for that, at least.
Right.
Portion.
Right. Exactly. So that's good. Good. Oh, I love that story. It's really great.
I hope that gives people, I mean, I always think like if I could do it, anybody could do it. But that sounds so self-deprecating, and I shouldn't sound like that. But I do think that importance of building those connections. It's never too late to start if you're not.
Right.
And I think right now we are in this extraordinary time in our lives where we actually have a do-over opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? In a few months where we can actually be really intentional about who we want to surround ourselves with.
Right. No, I think those are the big takeaways that I got from reading your book, is the intentionality, the generosity, really, and that's what kept striking me, is the generosity underneath every action that you're recommending, helping people, learning about them, being curious, going deeper, building these connections. And it's not so much about getting something, it's about, investing in people, which I think you say a couple of times, and helping people find their passions, support their passions, build on that, because it makes everyone's happier. And when you're connected, you're just a happier person, and the people around you are happy. It is a constellation. We're all connected. We're all moving pieces in the same constellation. So incredibly inspiring. And congratulations again. And I should mention there is a great Q&A with Susan about her book on thewolfer.com, www.thewolfer.com. And I recommend that everyone go out and get it.
Thank you.
Really fabulous. Many, many congratulations. And I hope I see you around the neighborhood soon.
You bet. We should arrange a walk. And, today is kind of a dismally
rainy. I know. Today is a little gray.
Or anytime after work sounds absolutely wonderful.
Oh, I would love that. Such a pleasure.